Just a few brief announcements before we begin the services for Mr. Jeffrey Herr. Officiating this afternoon will be Rabbi Seth Limmer from Chicago Sinai Congregation. The interment will take place following the service here at Oakwood Cemetery located in Chicago. Our procession will form facing east in front of the temple on Delaware Street. We will make sure that all cars have magnetic flags for on top of your vehicle, as well as an orange safety sticker, which should be placed on the inside portion of your windshield. And to use your bright headlights and emergency flasher lights as all times during the procession, as we will be taking Lakeshore Drive for the majority of the trip. Condolence calls will be observed at the Herr residence at 1130 North Lakeshore Drive, Unit 6E in Chicago, and that is today, Wednesday, and Thursday from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. And parking has been provided by the family at 1150 North Lakeshore Drive parking garage, just to let the attendant know that you're there for the Herr family. The pallbearers this afternoon will be Ben Siegel, Max Siegel, Joe Siegel, Rachel Zinberg, Jacqueline Vlietstra, and Erica Howard. I'll ask everyone to please rise at this time as the family enters the sanctuary.
The words of Ecclesiastes. L'kol zman ve'et, l'kol chefetz tachat hashamayim, et laledet, ve'et lamut. For everything there is a season, a time for every experience under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant, a time to uproot what is planted, a time to tear down, a time to build up, a time to weep, and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. We gather today for all of these activities, and we gather now specifically here in our sanctuary to speak memories and legacy of Jeffrey Herr, who has been taken from us, to speak words and offer acts of compassion, of condolence, of sympathy and sorrow for his family, for Toby, for Julie and Matthew, for Lucy and Eleanor and Caleb, for Stephen, for Jacqueline, Rachel, Erica, Daniel, Andrew, Mark, and keeping the late David in our thoughts as well. And in our sanctuary, we will have people come and speak to us about the Jeff they knew and loved. And later today, all of us will have the opportunity to share our words, whether it is following our services for those who wish to join us for the interment at Oakwood Cemetery, or today, tomorrow, or Thursday at Shiva from 4 to 7 at 1130 North Lakeshore, with instructions necessary on parking, all taken care of in your program. Getting to hear from so many different people about Jeff these past few days, this following poem came to my mind. When I die, give what's left of me away to children and those that wait to die. And if you need to cry, cry for your brother walking the street beside you. And when you need me, put your arms around anyone and give to them what you need to give to me. I want to leave you something better than words or sounds. Look for me in the people I have known and loved. And if you cannot give me away, at least let me live in your eyes and not only in your mind. You can love me most by letting hands touch bodies and by letting go of children that need to be free. Love doesn't die. People do. So when all that's left of me is love, give me away.
There are stars up above, so far away we only see their light. Long, long after the star itself is gone. And so it is with people that we loved. Their memories keep shining ever brightly, though their time with us is done. But the stars that light up the darkest night, these are the lights that guide us as we live our days. These are the ways we remember. We remember as we live our days. These are the ways we remember. We remember. יש כוכבים שאורם מגיע ארצה, רק אשר הם עצמם עבדו ונום. יש נשים שזיו זכרם מאיר, כאשר הם עצמם אינם עוד בתוכנו. Otros אלה המדליקים בחשכת הליל, הם שמראים לאדם את הדרך, את הדרך. שמראים לאדם את הדרך, את הדרך, as we live our days. These are the ways we remember. We remember as we live our days. These are the ways we remember. We remember. We remember. We remember.
Unlike all of you, I had little chance to know Jeffrey. And so I share now the outlines of his life, the bold strokes. And following me, we will hear the personal accounts from so many of the different parts of Jeffrey you all knew and loved. Jeff was born June 1st, 1938, in DeKalb. Not Michael Reese, we clarified that. In DeKalb. To Florence Levenstein Herr and Mandel Herr. 4 years later, Stephen entered the family. We'll hear more from him in a moment. And in 1954, Mandel passed away when the boys were young. And that death certainly had an impact. As did the fact that the family was one of maybe 4 or 5 Jewish families in a small town. There may have been only one other Jewish kid in Jeff's class. Florence and Mandel were concerned greatly about anti-Semitism. And Jeff sometimes wondered as a child if it wasn't easier just to be a Christian in this country. We know where he landed, being one of the original key major supporters of our United States Holocaust Museum and Memorial in Washington, D.C. Growing up, Jeff was, as he remains, extremely well-liked. He had a lot of friends, and as Steve said, I admired him. I liked his friends a lot. It was a lot of fun hanging around with Jeff and his friends. When going to Wharton at the University of Pennsylvania, Jeff became president of his fraternity, ZBT, had many friends from there and kept in touch with them over the years. Maybe you're in the room with us or on Zoom with us now. And then after he finished Wharton and not really know what to do, he applied and got into Harvard Law School, which I think counts only as a fun fact, since he had Steve write a letter and turn down going, and never wound up attending that school, even if he was in the freshman book. Instead, after a stint in the Army in 1961, Jeff went to work in stock brokerage, and that's how we and the internet know him, from those articles that have been sent to me. Starting at A.C. Allen and Company, and that was his career. His longest term was with the Chicago Corporation, and about 13 years ago, Jeff retired and turned over his portfolio to his nephew Daniel after, I think if we counted right, nearly 50 years in the business. Jeff was a very smart guy who had great intuition, was a very smart investor in securities, because he had a unique perspective and was able to analyze things carefully and dispassionately. He evidently never used a computer, never learned even to use a computer, because he had one in his head. And as Steve said, two things about his success. The first is, I don't believe he ever had a customer who lost money with him. And the second is that he was incredibly successful, but you wouldn't know it by the way he dressed. Jeff and Toby met in the late 60s and were married in 1970 at the Standard Club. May it too rest in peace. Soon bringing Julie into the family, and as Steve said, they were really happy together. Jeffrey really loved Toby, and he super loved Julie. I don't remember them ever fighting. I don't remember any anger. He remembers a lot of laugh and fun and good times, and I think an average of 360 dinners out every calendar year. There's no doubt that Jeff was gracious and generous and touched your lives. There's no doubt that he has many friends and those who love him. And now is the time for us to hear from them, beginning with his brother, Stephen.
Well, if Mr. Biden can use some notes, I can too. The rabbi's told you a lot of what I've already shared with him, so I'm going to be a little less lengthy than I thought. I'm usually pretty loud and abusive, but now I'm a little more laconic. At any rate, it was great hanging out with Jeff when you're 12 years old and he's 16. He's got a bunch of friends, and they're all talking about women and things of that nature, and doing weird things, and and I didn't have a father around, so it was a good learning experience. And then of course you learned he went on to college, and he continued to have tremendous numbers of friends. It's really well liked. And the story about Harvard was he finished school and wasn't sure what he wanted to do, which is not atypical, and he applies to some law schools. He gets into Harvard, and then one day he and I were playing cards in our home in DeKalb. That was the summer before he was going to go to Harvard, and he's distracted. I don't know if we were playing blackjack or gin rummy, and I said, "Hey Jeff, pay attention, I could cheat you." And he said, Steph, you're too dumb to cheat." And he was right. And then, I don't know if it was right at that same time or not, and he said, "By the way, go over to that typewriter and write a note to Louis Topher, who's the dean of Harvard Law, and tell him I'm not coming. But as the rabbi said, and as I mentioned to him, he made the freshman yearbook for that year, even though he did not attend. So that was Jeff in another way. And then he went on in the brokerage firm, as you learned. Jeff had great intuition. He knew how to value at least securities, if not many other things. He just, and intuition is something that you can't learn. It's a gift. And he used it. And again, as the rabbi mentioned, he was dispassionate about investing, didn't get tied up in emotional stuff. He helped me financially and my family, which was a bonus of having a great brother. We got involved in buying Manischewitz stock, and that's important as of this holiday we're in right now. And at some point, Jeff was finding other investors and got enough votes during a proxy fight and won himself a seat on the board of the company. And the company had been basically run by family and associates, and it was a slowly moving outfit. Jeff tried to speed it up a little bit. I think he ran up against a lot of resistance. But at any rate, the family began fighting at some point, and Jeff actually became chairman of the board of the company, which was really quite interesting because he was a very secular Jew. I mean, and he didn't. I don't even know how much matzah he ever ate, frankly. But his brother, I had for many years and still have the plate, although it's not active. I have a license plate in California that says matzah. And of course, I forgot to bring it. I really wanted to show it to you, but I don't have it on my car anymore. Jeff had a number of periods where he was down, and those were interspersed with his good times. They were difficult, but he seemed to always come back, and he was very social with my children. Unfortunately, we weren't together that often, despite being brothers, because I'd be at school or I'd be doing some internship or some work. Then I went to California, so I really wasn't that close. But we were communicating a lot. I also have had some very difficult times in my life, and he and Toby both were on the phone all the time with me, helping me get through. I only one time got into a fight with him that I started, and it was over the usual money, and it occurred one night on Michigan Avenue late at night. I don't think many of you will be out at Michigan Avenue late at night these days. It was the summertime, I remember, because I wasn't wearing a heavy coat or anything like that, and it finally blew over, and I realized that I'd made a mistake and it was wrong, and I've been ashamed of it and embarrassed ever since. But what I learned from that was there's nothing like having brothers together, and that's why I want these guys to stay together all the time. As you heard also, Jeff was very generous. And one of the stories I like to tell is, and mind you, these are stories that I've heard. I wasn't there. So Jeff, and I believe Toby may have been with him, was walking home one night from one of the restaurants in this area. And I never saw Jeff or Toby take food home from a restaurant. Okay, so he's telling me they're taking food home this night. And I guess it had the name of the restaurant on the bag. And there's someone on the street who's, looking for money or something. And so Jeff goes over and says, "Here, take this." And the guy looks at the bag and says, "They got shitty food there." So that was a gift that was rebuffed. But he otherwise was extremely generous, and I think most of you know that. Jeff and Toby were great examples of a family and a partnership, and that also bodes well for these guys. Julie, too, has turned out to be a fantastic woman, mom, and just overall worker. She's helped her family tremendously, and that makes me so proud of her. In closing, I just want to say that Jeff was a good guy. He was a good husband, a good father, a good grandfather. He was a good friend, and he was a great American. And he made my life better, and he made a lot of other lives better. Rest well, brother. The demons are gone. You'll never be forgotten.
Thank you, Stephen. Dr. Taylor Seagraves.
Excuse me for a minute, I gotta collect myself. Jeff was my closest friend in life. Even after we left Chicago, we still kept in touch. We called each other, and it's interesting, when I was told to resign as chairman of my department, one of the first things I did was call Jeff, and then check the airlines and fly over. I remember talking to Jeff at Lake Shore, and I said, you know, I've been put out to pasture. And he says, me too, but you go first, tell me. And we talked 5 or 6 hours, flew back to Chicago, nothing changed, except both of us felt better. I think Jeff is one of the kindest people I've ever known. This is going back like 50 years ago. A common friend said her boyfriend was abusive, and that she couldn't leave because she had to wait for 2 paychecks so she could get her own apartment. And then Jeff blurts out, you can stay with us. And then he hesitates a moment. He says, well, I'll have to ask Tobes, but I'm sure she'd be okay with it. And then he hesitates a bit longer, and he says, well, Julie would have to share her room, but I'm sure she'd be okay with that. And he was always embarrassed that he would jump forward without thinking. And to me, that was what I loved about him. If somebody was hurting, he was there, and he wanted to help. I remember when I almost entered the wrong marriage and canceled things the day before the wedding was supposed to take place. And I was at home, and I heard my doorbell ringing, and it was Jeff. And outside there was a taxi waiting. And Jeff looks at me and says, you're okay. He goes to the taxi and leaves. But I knew if I'd been in a bad way, he would have stayed all night or all day, or as long as it's necessary to help me feel better. The other thing about Jeff I really loved is his sense of adventure, risk-taking. Tobes always said I encouraged his lack of responsibility, and I have to admit I am guilty. I did. I remember I was very proud being just an assistant professor at the University of Chicago, feeling very self-important. And Jeff says, let's go to the International Billiard Tournament downtown Chicago. So worse than that, we go in, and there's this huge drapery hanging down, this little tiny ticket booth. It was kind of ridiculous. Anyway, the ticket was $1.25. And Jeff looks at me and he says, let's sneak in. And damned if we didn't. And the other thing was going to the movie when the one you wanted to see was sold out. It was buy the ticket for the other movie and sneak into the one you want to go to. And it's every man for himself. And I think it was that, Jeff said, what is it? The secret to life is learning to walk the thin line between boredom and between boredom and anxiety. And I think he always walked a little further to the anxiety side than I would have, and that's part of what was our connection. The other thing is how he did a lot of investing with small companies that Seth mentioned. He would, I think, understand the finances of the company, but he'd always fly out to meet the manager or whoever ran the company and spend the day with them, or at least a long afternoon. And I think he would come back. He wanted to know this person. And he loved hearing people's life stories and what their lives had been like and what they took from that. And I think being a psychiatrist, that's how Jeff and I had a natural affinity. I don't know what else to say other than I really, really miss him. Thank you.
Ben Siegel.
I'm Ben Siegel. I was largely known to the Herr family as the godson. It's unusual, as far as I know, among Jews to have godparents, but Toby and Jeff were my godparents. And if nothing else, this was an opportunity for Jeff and I, with mock solemnity to do Godfather imitations. So we would refer to each other in the third person as the Godfather and the Godson. Jeff's Marlon Brando, a kind of Ashkenazi rendition, was far better than my Al Pacino. He had the heavy breathing, the slow, deliberate breathing down. But I grew up with Jeff as the godson, and amidst this wreckage and loss, I'm mostly reminded of a lot of humor and a lot of laughter that was in my house when Jeff and Toby and Julie were there. There are just, for better or worse, millions of jokes that come to mind. I recall a particular story, and there may be a kernel of truth to it, but I think Jeff was being interviewed by Barron's, or a financial paper, and Jeff was reminded that he was a graduate of the Wharton School of Business, and that the Wharton School of Business was just behind in rankings to the likes of Stanford and Harvard. And Jeff told the newspaper, yeah, but that's not really fair because many of our best guys are in jail. Yeah, particularly in his relationship with Toby, my parents, there were many jokes where you could just say the punchline. And in fact, they would just repeat the punchline. The joke became sort of irrelevant. I'm reminded of a particular punchline, the joke of which would be completely inappropriate in these walls. But the punchline was, do I know it? I wrote it. And I think, again, for decades, that would make Toby, Jeff, and Harry cackle. But the reason I'm here on the subject of writing it is a letter that I shared with Julie, and that has been, frankly, hung on the wall of my parents' home and now in my house. That's over 40 years old. The letter was written to me when I was 5 years old. And I think, I'll let Jeff's words speak for themselves. It's on corporate letterhead. The B. Manischewitz Company, 340 Henderson Street, Jersey City, New Jersey, 07302. Jeffrey M. Herr, Chairman of the Board. July 29th, 1980. Mr. Benjamin Siegel, 650 Ravine Road, East Dundee, Illinois. Dear Ben, my godson, I have quietly observed your growth over the past 5 years and the care that your parents have given to your physical and spiritual needs. Recently, I suggested to your father that you may now be of age to begin learning of the ways of commerce and industry, and he agreed. Therefore, your godfather is giving you $160 in cash to honor your 5th birthday and suggests that you begin your financial education with the purchase of 1 share of stock in the B. Manischewitz Company. I am confident that your strength and knowledge will continue to grow. Lovingly, Jeffrey Herr, your godfather.
Thank you, and thank you for sparing us the joke and giving us something to look forward to later, Ben. Jill Weinberg.
I'm Jill Weinberg. I'm the Midwest Regional Director for the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. And when I first started this position 33 years ago, one of the first meetings I had was with Harry Siegel in Elgin. And at the end of the meeting, like I did with almost every meeting, I said to him, is there anyone else that you think would be interested in hearing about this new project? And he said, I think that Jeff and Toby Herr would be very interested. And it was shortly after that I met Jeff and Toby Herr for the first time. And what interesting people they are. Toby, with her groundbreaking Welfare to Work project and her bohemian clothing. Jeff, with his understated demeanor and incredibly curious mind. Immediately, I was a fan. Way before the museum was built, I organized a trip to DC to see the model of what the museum was going to be and to see the land where it would be created. Jeff and Toby were among this core group of Chicagoans who were interested in seeing this. After a year of hearing from museum directors and historians about what this museum might be if it got the funding, we had a dinner that night, and all of us got to listen to some of the people in our group, survivors, liberators, and other committed donors. And then, after listening to everybody speak, Jeff got up and he said, if I ever have $1 million, I want to give it to this museum. Everybody was in awe, but Toby was in shock. People still tell this story saying, I thought she had fainted. She was falling out of her chair. It was a moment 30 years ago that I and many others will remember. Years later, Jeff and Toby gave that first million and have been giving ever since, understanding the importance and necessity of educating people about the Holocaust, lessons so badly needed today in this world of rising anti-Semitism and hate, understanding the museum's global reach. Jeff and Toby have directed their funding to an area of incredible importance, our oral history archive, not only helping to record thousands of survivors and liberators, but it was their idea to record perpetrators and bystanders. These are very rare testimonies that had never been collected before and now are part of the Jeff and Toby Herr Testimony Initiative. It was the vision of Jeff and Toby that has shaped the exceptional nature of the museum's oral history archive and made it the preeminent collection in the world. It is now named the Jeff and Toby Herr Oral History Archives. On a professional level, I have so much to thank Jeff and Toby for. On a personal level, I have so much to thank them for also. At one of my many dinners with them at Gina Giorgetti's, where I was always so impressed because
they got a table on the first floor. My family was always relegated to the top floor, so this was a really big deal. And at one of these dinners, Jeff told me that he was reading my brother Mark's book. Jeff wanted to meet Mark, and he wanted to fix him up with their daughter, Julie. That is how I met the wonderful Julie, who I adore. Julie, you are a wonderful daughter and a mother, and I thank you for sharing your great kids with me and for asking me to share my thoughts today. Toby, thank you and Jeff for your vision, your generosity, and your dedication to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Jeff, I too will miss you. May you rest in peace, knowing how great a legacy you have left of generosity and caring for all of us to follow and model. Thank you.
Rabbi Ruthie Guilford.
I first met Jeff and Toby over 20 years ago when Julie and I became flatmates and fast friends. Like others of you here, I became one of Julie's non-blood sisters, and as such was welcomed into the extended motley crew of the Herr family and friends. Jeff was certainly not like any other friend's father. Actually, I had never met anyone quite like Jeff before. He was one of a kind and original. He was a mensch and a maverick. I was the recipient of Jeff's generosity when he decided it was time to take a trip to Israel and Greece in the early 2000s. Off Jeff, Julie, and I, and Toby very reluctantly went. Jeff arrived wearing one of his favorite jackets. It was an olive green jacket with a design on the shoulder. It had 4 stars, and the jacket did resemble an army uniform. And during our trip, quite a few people asked Jeff if he was a general. Playful and picaresque, Jeff would just smile. Throughout our trip and to our initial horror, I have a New York accent, forgive me, he insisted on carrying his beloved 1970s plastic Pan Am carry-on travel bag everywhere. And while Jeff enjoyed many of the finer things in life, especially nice hotels, he was not enamored with seeing one more ruin and wouldn't pretend he was, so he insisted we just return to the hotel to relax and enjoy some food. He was completely without pretense. Although seemingly shy, he befriended an array of people. And back home in Chicago, almost nightly, Jeff, I loved hearing this story, loved to go to Mr. Kite's candy store on State Street. And he would address Mr. Kite and he would ask, chant, or, you know this, or serenade. And with the answer at hand, Jeff would chant, Mr. Kite, what do you have tonight? Or he would serenade, oh, Mr. Kite, what do you have tonight? Playful and picaresque, Jeff at his best made life fun. Jeff, forever the iconoclast,
discussed the long, painful arc of Jewish history and humanity's cyclical downturns. And that is one of the reasons he donated, or perhaps a better word would be invested, generously in the work of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. While many believed we were past nationalistic fervors and anti-Semitism, Jeff sadly proved prescient. Jeff was a proud Jew, and a secular Jew, but a proud Jew. And during the holiday of Passover, I can't help but think that for most of us, that means eating Manischewitz matzah, gefilte fish, or macaroons. For Jeff, it also meant becoming chair of the Manischewitz board at age 34. How does someone even do that? I have no idea. When Julie and I were flatmates in Chicago in the late 1990s, this actually might have happened in the early 2000s, Jeff arranged to visit one of his heroes. Off Jeff, Julie, Toby, and Brett, Jeff's trainer, went to Indiana to visit Muhammad Ali, who was named the 1999 Sportsman of the Century by Sports Illustrated. At first, I didn't understand Jeff's fascination or appreciation of the late great boxer, but soon after this trip, I learned and studied a bit more about Muhammad Ali and his life. Muhammad was arguably the greatest at what he did, and he was an activist, an iconoclast, an insightful spoken word artist, and a man unparalleled with moral courage. Ali apparently was a role model with lots to teach. Well, between the Jewish holidays of Passover and Shavuot, it is traditional to study the Jewish work, Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of the Fathers, a 3rd century collection of timeless wisdom and short sayings. So in Jeff's honor, I want to share an alternative Pirkei Avot, a Pirkei Avot de Ali, de Muhammad Ali. And these are quotes from Muhammad Ali. If my mind can conceive it, if my heart can believe it, then I can achieve it. He who is not courageous enough to take risks will accomplish nothing in life. Service to others is the rent you pay for your room here on earth. And it isn't the mountains ahead to climb that wear you out. It's the pebble in your shoe. Rest in peace. Zichrono livracha. May your memories always be for a blessing.
Julie?
Is this okay? Can I be seen? I'm going to share a few thoughts about my dad. Can you hear okay? Is that what I'm doing? Okay. Thank heavens for all my BFFs and that they're all here. My oldest BFF, Melissa, has teased me retrospectively about something I did in kindergarten. And then afterwards, I guess I did it too. Apparently, when we were learning about jobs and parents' jobs, and remember this was the lab school circa 1981, we went around the room and volunteered what our parents did. Kid 1, my mom's a professor of anthropology. Kid 2, so is my dad. Kid 3, my dad too. Kid 4, my dad teaches in the law school. Kid 5, my dad's dean of divinity. And then My dad invests in intrinsically undervalued securities. When she teases me now from her bully pulpit managing real estate for Blackstone in New York, she says, Jules, what even was that? That's not a thing. It's redundant. Everyone's trying to do that. And to her, I say, fair, and I understand, and fine. But also, wasn't that kind of an effing good way to say it? I mean, especially for an outsider trying to make it at the lab school. I mean, it is what he did. Many of us know a lot about his relationships to stock and his stocks and his proficiency therein. But I was thinking about something else, about his proficiency with language. Wasn't he kind of great at that too? He'd talk to people, but he'd imbue many things with the wisdom, a flair, simply through his timing and his word choice. He'd begin a sentence and then wait. And wait. And wait. And just when you thought nothing was coming, the just right word, or two, or three would reveal themselves slowly and with no wasted breath. Listen to it again. My dad invests in intrinsically undervalued securities. It's fun to say. It rolls off the tongue. It's classy. Like stocks is an ugly word. It sounds like something you trade. But securities. Security. That sounds way more important than anthropology or law. Maybe more important than divinity. Securities secure you. And when you're a kid, that's all you really want. The best thing about stocks with intrinsic value is that they're like your babies. You can commit to them indefinitely. You can hold them, you can watch them, you can believe in them, and you can just hope they fulfill the potential that you know is there. So here's my new spin on my dad that I came up with today, and I think he'd be fine with it. Jeff Herr, poet. Poets use few words to get the whole message, plus many more across. His home Rolodex of all of you reads like a snapshot of his life. It's idiosyncratically systematic and not uniform, but it works. Seagraves, home. Eric, Paul Stewart. Roop, D-A-F-L. That's Q-sip for Duart. Rosebud Steakhouse, manager will deliver. It's his poetry. There you all are in the Rolodex. Your most salient info in all caps, occasionally with the Q-sips of stocks you may have held. The same ones of you pop up on the multiple cards like a chorus of two-word clues with a few numbers. As I rolled through the Rolodex, each card written in his cryptic writing read like a coded love note. With the most affection in the world, my mom used to say, Jeff's a little monosyllabic. Yeah, Mom, because you married a poet. In 1995 or 1996, when my dad had to have an emergency quadruple bypass, I flew home from college and got there right in time to say goodbye and to say good luck. I was a wreck. We were a wreck. The nurse came into to get him before the surgery, and he asks with alarm, why does my monitor say piss on it? Me, my mom, and the nurse all turned to the gray machine tracking something critically important that's about to be rolled with him into the surgery. Written vertically down the monitor in black permanent marker, it says capital P, capital I, 5, 5. So yeah, it said piss. My mom says, Jeff, it does not. He says, yes, it says P-I-S-S. Now he waits as the nurse tries to decide what to say. And then he turns right to her and he says, you see it right. Someone put piss on my monitor. Now the perfectly humorless nurse intervenes and says, oh, no, sir. It says PI 55. But my dad says, well, to me it clearly says P-I-S-S, piss. So now my mom's really laughing. And now he looks at her and she's going and he says, you see, my wife can see it clearly that it says PP on my monitor. Someone pissed on it. Now my mom is doubled over and guffawing, and he's saying with increasing exasperation, bring anyone from the hall to see my monitor because it says piss. And it went on like that, and it was poetry. My initials are JMH, same as my dad's. I still remember pointing this out to him in the 70s when I noticed him pick up a completely uncharacteristic but very handsome monogrammed suitcase. According to him, our shared initials were coincidental. My name is also the same as Julie O's, the daughter of Ted Oppenheimer, his dear friend, who my dad introduced to Julie's mom, Irma Oppenheimer, of blessed memory. Apparently, at my birth, Big Julie was already, at age 6, a phenom to my parents. But the name thing, they say, was not intentional, had nothing to do with her, nothing to do with her parents. They just liked the name. That's all. So then I keep trying to figure out, did it come from anywhere? And then another coincidence. The nickname for Julie is Jules. So I wondered later, maybe my name had something to do with my dad's most beloved Uncle Julius Jules Levenstein. After all, he was like a father to my dad after my dad's own dad passed away when he was a teenager. Nope, nothing to do with that. They just liked it. My dad was a very purposeful guy who made magical plans seem casual. When I was an infant, my dad started buying me stocks, a single share of anything that looked remotely interesting to him. Over the years, much of the mail in our house was addressed to me. I'm guessing no preschooler on earth owned more annual reports. By the time I was 17, my account was the Jeff Hurt Index Fund, a periodic table of the stuff Jeff loved most. Every security represented a thought, a belief, a curiosity, and a gift. He absolutely dealt out a part of himself with every good stock he bought for me and for the family of clients that trusted him. But the guy did something else for us all after he dealt out the stocks. Something against the odds. The guy stayed around to watch us grow too. This is a good one, he used to say about me to my mother. I may as well have been a stock certificate or vice versa. And so, Melissa, just for today, let's update what we said he did and call him poet investor, lover of bad odds, champions for underdogs. Against the odds and on his own terms, he lived to watch me grow and have children. To me, he is the greatest of all time, the ultimate chairman of the board. I'll close with this poem from my dad's hero. In 1975, Muhammad Ali gave a commencement speech at Harvard to 2,000 students, and when it was over, a student shouted, "Give us a poem." Apparently, it was super loud, and Ali thought long and hard, like somebody else we all know. Relishing the dramatic moments it took for the noise to die down, Ali took his time composing what is arguably the shortest poem on record. He said, "Me, we." It's now debated whether he meant me, we, or me, we. But either way, it feels right to me today. Me, we, Daddy, me, we. May your memory be a blessing always and forever.
In loving memory of Jeff Herr, we rise.
El male rachamim, shochen bamramim, amzim menucha nechona, tachat kanfer hashkinah. Kiroshim utorim, kizor haragim mazhirim, linishmat yakireinu, shehalach, shehalach li'olamo. Yastirehu b'seter knafav li'olamim v'tziror hachayim et nishmato Adonai unachleto v'yanuach b'shalom b'shalom al mishkavo v'nomar
Compassionate God, who dwells on heights, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Jeffrey Herr, who has entered eternity. Eternal One, let him find refuge in the shadow of your wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of life eternal. Eternity is his inheritance. May he rest in peace and in dignity. And let us say, Amen.